On July 18, 1967, a group of 5 men radioed from the summit of Denali that they were experiencing whiteout conditions and were heading back down. Moments later, the first of a series of unsurvivable storms arrived. In July 1967, a group of 12 climbers known as the Wilcox Group attempted to climb the highest peak in North America, Denali. The Wilcox Group consisted of 2 combined groups. The Colorado Group initially included Paul Schlichter, Howard Snyder, and Jerry Lewis. The minimum number in a group of climbers allowed to climb Denali was 4. Steve Lewis, Jerry's brother, initially was to climb with them, but 7 days before leaving for Alaska, he broke his hand in a car accident. As Steve couldn't attend, the 3 others joined the Wilcox Group. The Wilcox Group included 9 men led by Joe Wilcox, including Ansel Schiff, Jerry Clark, Steve Taylor, Dennis Lichterhan, Henry James, Mark McLaughlin, Walter Taylor, and John Russell. The Colorado team had spent the last 4 years preparing for this moment by climbing Colorado's 14ers, as well as 18,491-foot Pico de Orizaba in Mexico and the always formidable Mount Rainier in Washington. No one on the Wilcox team other than Schlichter and Snyder from Colorado Group had been above 15,000 feet. The majority of these climbers were not prepared for a test like Denali. In 2016, the name of the mountain changed from Mount McKinley to Denali. The mountain and the national park had previously been named after the 25th President of the United States, William McKinley. Denali is the highest peak in North America, standing at an elevation of 20,310 feet, 6,190 meters above sea level. However, the height from the base to peak is one of the features that makes Denali so formidable. The base surrounding Denali is only 1,000 to 3,000 feet above sea level, creating a base-to-peak height of between 17,000 and 19,000 feet, depending on the starting point and the summit. To put this in perspective, Mount Everest, which rises to an astonishing height of 29,029 feet, rises from the Tibetan Plateau at a height of 13,800 feet and from a height of 17,100 feet on the plateau side. Everest's base-to-peak height is between 12,000 and 15,000 feet. Denali is an extremely formidable mountain. Denali sits at the 63rd parallel, which results in extremely high winds and colder temperatures the further away from the equator. Denali also sits relatively close to 2 bodies of water, the Gulf of Alaska and the Bering Sea. This gives rise to low-pressure systems that are more intense than almost anywhere else on the planet. These extremely high winds slam into Denali and quickly rise up the mountain, turning into clouds and snow. These conditions combine for dramatic weather changes that can cause extreme storms to come in one after another for weeks on end. Now, over 1,000 people attempt Denali each year with a 70% success rate. However, in July 1967, when the Wilcox expedition set off to summit Denali, there had only been 213 people that had ever successfully summited the mountain. The Wilcox expedition took the Muldrow Glacier route to the South Peak at 20,310 feet. The ascent begins at Wonder Lake at just a mere 2,000 feet above sea level. Therefore, the total ascent is 18,335 feet. Generally, the total time from departing Wonder Lake to the return is 21 to 35 days, depending on the route and the weather. Camp 1 is at McGonigal Pass at 5,720 feet. The group left McGonigal Pass and forced their way through the lower ice fall, taking up 5 miles along the base of Pioneer Ridge. From here, the climbers zigzag up the Muldrow Glacier to 8,515 feet until they are even with the base of Mount Carp. This is Camp 3. The Muldrow Glacier is fast-moving and always changing. Climbers say that the descent is a completely different glacier than they climbed on the ascent. The group then turned left and passed along the base of Mount Carp and Mount Coven towards Karstens Notch at 10,930 feet. Just below Karsten's Notch is Camp 4 at 10,800 feet. Karsten's Ridge and Coxcomb is the crux of the climb. This 1.2-mile climb is very dangerous, but provides a suitable campsite. Early in the season, Karsten's Ridge is very icy, but in July, when the Wilcox expedition reached it, this is the time of snowstorms, and sometimes climbers have to shovel their way up Karsten's Ridge. After Karsten's Ridge, the climbers battled their way through the Coxcomb section to Brown Tower at 14,600 feet. This is Camp 6. The team then moved through Parker Pass and through the ice fall at 16,000 feet and made camp at Camp 7 at 16,400 feet. The team then set up high camp at 17,900 feet with just over 2,000 feet to the summit. On July 15th, many of the team were resting and dealing with altitude sickness at high camp. However, the most experienced and the most prepared climbers, Schlichter, Snyder, and Lewis from the Colorado team, and Wilcox, the leader of the Wilcox team, were not dealing with altitude effects and decided to summit while the weather was good. It was sunny and about 6 degrees when the men summited Denali. They spent about an hour to an hour and a half on the summit before descending back to high camp at 17,900 feet, where the other 8 men waited. During their descent at Denali Pass, the wind picked up and snow began to blow. When they arrived at high camp, the other 8 members of the group had decided that they would make their summit attempt the next day, July 16th. However, the weather did not cooperate. The 16th had extremely poor weather with winds whipping up to 70 miles per hour. The team hunkered down and waited. They didn't have to wait long, as on the 17th the skies cleared to sunny and mild weather by early afternoon. Ansel Schiff, a 30-year-old assistant college professor from Indiana, was dealing with altitude sickness and decided that he was not able to summit. So, at 1 p.m., Schiff, Snyder, Schlichter, Lewis, and Wilcox began their descent. Therefore, there were 5 men descending, and there were 7 men left at high camp. Of the 7 men at high camp, 6 men decided to attempt to summit, while one man, Steve Taylor, age 23, was suffering from altitude sickness and decided to remain at high camp. As the 5 men descended, they could see above them that at nearly 2 hours after they had left, the 6-man group had not yet began their ascent. They had expected them to start their ascent at around 1 p.m., but instead they were tidying up camp and looking for equipment that had been covered by the storm the day before. Schlichter is quoted as saying, "You don't waste good weather on Denali. When the weather is good, you go." The team began their ascent at 3 p.m., led by Joe Clark, a 31-year-old engineer who had been on several Antarctica expeditions. At 8:30 p.m. that evening, Clark radioed Ilsen Visitor Center. The team was high up on the mountain, but were in whiteout conditions. They were close to the summit, but couldn't be sure where exactly they were. Leaving later in the afternoon and in such good weather, they had planned to make a quick summit and get right back to camp. So, they didn't have any tents, few sleeping bags, and only a little food. They hunkered down and waited out the night. Though weather conditions were still poor, they made it to the summit at 11:30 a.m. on July 18th. They radioed the visitors center and reported that they were on the summit in whiteout conditions and were heading back down to high camp. They were also only 5 men now instead of 6. John Russell was no longer with the group and they didn't know where he was. So they were continuing on trying to make it back. They said they would descend as far as they could and radio again at 8 o'clock that night. Just moments after this communication, the worst series of storms to ever hit Denali arrived. Initially, gusts increased to 100 miles per hour, and the temperature plummeted to 15 degrees below zero. The people at the base knew that they couldn't have climbed in these weather conditions, but they could have survived. However, the series of storms lasted 7 days, with winds reaching 300 miles per hour and temperatures decreasing down to 30 degrees below zero. These conditions were completely unsurvivable, and before anyone could even return to the mountain to check, everyone knew that none of the 7 remaining men could have survived. Snyder, Schlichter, Lewis, Schiff, and Wilcox just made it below the storm and returned to base camp on July 25th. The storm hit so suddenly that the men were either still on the summit or on the summit ridge at over 20,000 feet. Snyder stated, These guys were still either on the very summit itself or on the summit ridge above 20,000 feet when the storm hit. All of a sudden, the air turns opaque, you can't see anything, and the wind starts immediately. You can't imagine a worse situation. Schlichter added, "I think they started down and they reached a point where they said, 'It's every man for himself.'" After the storms cleared, the search and rescue teams only found 3 bodies. 2 bodies were found on the slopes of Archdeacon's Tower. Schlichter stated, "I think the 2 bodies were probably Walt Taylor and Denny Luchterhan." He believes that they attempted to climb down the 4,000-foot slope to camp at 15,000 feet and perished along the way. Another body was found at High Camp, possibly Russell, the man that was missing when they summited. Steve Taylor had stayed behind at High Camp and didn't summit. During the storm, he had climbed down between High Camp and Camp 6 at 15,000 feet and draped his sleeping bag around his pickaxe. He most likely did this to signal the group down below that he was still up there and that he needed help. He had most likely fallen into a nearby crevasse as he attempted to descend or ascend back up to High Camp. The other 4 men were never found. Wilcox, who left his group and joined the Colorado group, blamed himself for many years for the loss of the 7 men. After 3 studies, 2 by the National Weather Service and 1 by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, showing that the storm was unsurvivable, he was able to move on. In the end, they all came to the conclusion that because the men waited and didn't take advantage of the good weather conditions, they were caught in an unsurvivable storm. On July 18th, Dennis Luchterhan, Henry James, Walt Taylor, Steve Taylor, John Russell, Mark McLaughlin, and Jerry Clark perished on Denali. Don't forget to like, leave comments, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.